is the fish are coming upriver. That's what fish do. They swim upriver, of course. And they get scooped up in that scoop. They get ride like a Ferris wheel. They ride to the top, and they get waterboarded on that piece of board. You see that board there? And they slide down the hill, or slide down the board into that green tube. And then they go down to the bottom, which is a fish hole. You can see the holes in the bottom, right? And water can pass through there with oxygen in it, and the fish are in there. They're just waiting.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Byrne Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. And if you're new here, you're probably saying, where is that? Not in America. And I would like to say, well, this is the question and answer video celebrating 2,000 subscribers. Kind of cool. Now, I'm not going to be doing this over and over and over for every 1,000 from here on. We'll wait till 5,000 for the next one, which might take a few years, but who knows. I did get a nice boost in subscribers when well, it looked like I was interviewing Jonathan Peugeot, but actually he was interviewing me, but I've gone into that before, so I'm not going to go into that again, but it was nice to see the new people. I don't go out of my way to look for new subscribers. I just get what I get, and I feel that this channel is not about, there's all these videos about how you get new subscribers and, you know, the punchy kind of editing and all of this stuff. And obviously I know my way around editing equipment, but the point of my edits are never to, you know, I can easily edit this down to something super punchy and such, but I don't want that. For me, it's about reality. And among the places in which there is reality is in getting real questions from people. And I think the point of that is, what I really want to see is, you know, what good would it do to get, you know, 2 million subscribers? I suppose it would look nice. But the problem is, and I felt that with the new folks coming from Jonathan Peugeot, some of them were like, wow, this is a great channel, I'm glad I found you. Others were like, wait a minute, this isn't quite what I want, which is fine, you know. But I feel like what I really want to see is I want to see things in reality more than I want to see things online. I don't do this to make money, although truthfully, whatever drips and drabs of money I make here really does help me. And you can contribute. There's a PayPal link below. Of course, subscribe, costs nothing. Like the video, costs nothing, and helps someone else find it. And it is good when other people find the videos. But what I really want to see is I want to see reality itself change. And especially the reality that people live in now where they're glued to their screens. I was just watching a video today of all the physical problems that come from spending way too much time looking at the phone. And I realized this way before we had cell phones. I remember when I was watching the Lost series, I would get these, I wasn't downloading, or it was hard to do then. I wasn't watching it online. I was waiting until I got the DVDs. And then one day I decided I didn't decide, my, some aspect of my sound and video system died on me. But I really wanted to watch the next season of Lost. So it came in, and all I had was the camera, the screen on my old camera. So I connected it up to that and watched it. And you know what I experienced at the end of that long period is my eyes felt like someone had been shooting into them. And that's one of the effects that comes from watching things moving around on too small a screen. We're not meant to do that. No, if I watch a little bit now and then, that's fine. But so, fortunately, though, there are more meetup type events, meetups, and we're having a conference in Germany, of which I will put a poster right there. In late August, and I will be there, and Paul Vanderklay will be there. So if you're at all in Europe, anywhere between Spain and we'll take Finland, Sweden down to Georgia. I doubt anyone here is going to go over there because people here haven't got that much money to go traveling around. Nevertheless, if you want to show up, you really should. I'm actually going to be interviewing Matthias Bergman later this week, and I'll put that up, and we're going to discuss the nuts and bolts of this conference. And you'll want to come and make it real. That is to say, you get to meet me and Paul Vanderklay, more importantly, and others. So, more people like yourself, if you enjoy these videos. So, smite like. So, we're going to do the question and answers now. And I haven't done this for a while, but 2000 seemed like a good time to do it. And I've kind of organized them so we start with the cultural things and move down to some of the, might be considered more philosophical or deeper things as we go. A guy who goes by the name of Metaphysics and spells it like this, only in the YouTube online world, or only online you get people who call that spelling. But hey, I don't mind. He's a great guy. He asked, could you do a longer video on the impact of smartphones, specifically on the democratization of the internet and on the post-2012 cyber-focused culture overall? I feel like 2012 and 13 will be a really crucial demarcation in the future, pre- and post-smartphone domination eras. I'll just say this, big question. Will I do a video on it? Well, I already have the video for that period, for how we got here. At some point, I might do something more around the way technology affects us. And that would certainly be in there. I consider the smartphone to be one of the things that has really altered our sense of reality. I am going to do my lecture, which will probably be videotaped, and I'll be able to share it with you at some point in August, on 3 visions of reality that I've experienced in my life. And the first being the world before the mid-60s. I just am vaguely pretty aware of it as a child. But then everything changes by the late 60s, and now you have a world of people, identity is no longer stable, and philosophy is no longer stable. What people actually live by day to day is no longer stable. Drugs adds to that. A fluid sense of sex adds to that. And all of these other things, which then changes. And the 2012-2013 period is certainly an important demarcation. I started at 2011 in my series, although that's more for political and social events. But certainly by that time, the eggs have been hatched from the social media revolution. And I will discuss how the world looks now very differently from the way it did, for instance, to the hippie generation and the grunge and alternative generation, and Generation X and all of that. Because they are three very distinct things, which leads me to conclude you shouldn't put, well, we might as well continue with the chicken and egg metaphors, shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't think that the way you see things now is the way things really are, because they aren't. You know, the things that worry us today will be completely forgotten about in 20 years, it looks like. Just as nobody thinks about the issues much that occupied people's brains 30 years ago. Continuing, the Renaissance man. There he is, he's here, he's watching me. Guy called the Renaissance man. Says, I think this may be a good question. As our digital twins, he puts in quotes, assume more of our identity, and as the younger generation seem to identify more and more with gender, sexuality, and race, how will the role of music and musicians change? In university, a record producer came and talked to our class, emphasizing how many of us still listen to Zeppelin, Van Halen, the Ramones, etc. As a sign of the degradation, he says degrading, but degradation is a better word, of today's music. I feel there's some kind of link between our online personas and art's decreasing influence, if it is decreasing. I can't tell if musical subcultures are no longer where we gather and where that will take us. The answer is yes, musical subcultures, you're right, they don't have that much of an influence anymore. And I go over this in at least 3 of the episodes of the last 3, we'll say, not the big 6-hour one, but the 20-aughts, the late 90s, the early 90s. That spelled the end of musical subcultures. And first they got totally commercialized by the end of the 90s, and then plus there was just nihilism within the musical subcultures. And then since then, we have drifted into a zone where no one pays attention anymore. You don't hear, people may listen to that older music, but you don't hear anyone talking about the history of it that much. Not in day-to-day conversation the way one used to. And I think that what that tells me is that, and I've said this before and I'm going to say it again, music no longer serves as a way to focus our attention upon the rebellion, the ennui we feel within mass society. It now is just one more additive product. There is great music being made still. And so what? That is to say, it doesn't really, how do you find it? Do you go online and just type great music? No. What do you find if you do that? Someone trying to tell you what the great music is. Are there even experts anymore in music? I mean, I kind of am, and I look at all these people who make the greatest songs ever videos or lists, and I'm sitting there saying, these people are microcephalic. They have little heads, and they think they know something. But, as soon as you put Justin Bieber into a list of the greatest music ever, it's gone. Any credibility is gone. As soon as you put, once you consider commercial music to be the greatest music ever, you've lost everything. You've lost all of your credibility. At the same time, if someone like me makes a list, and I do know my stuff, who's going to read it? I mean, literally. I've got 2,000 followers right now, which is better than when I started off with none. But what's 2,000 people in today's world? Just a drop in the ocean. You know what? If I had 2 million people follow me, drop in the ocean. What matters is how we understand these things. And I think that this weird online propaganda political matrix is what's infesting people's heads. So there are people out there protesting for certain views of gender, sexuality, race, all this other stuff. And they think they're the people questioning the system. but they're not. They are the system. And the people above them are just following them. Marvel is adding all these woke additives to their television series and movies. Why? Because they're under the impression that there's this symbiosis, which there is, between these content creators, which means, to me, it's just like, it's the word content. I have to do something on that because it's just so bizarre the way we use the word now. Content means nothing. You're just making content, where content used to be everything. Your work is so filled with content. In other words, there was something in the pail. There was something there. Whereas now, if you say it's just content, it means there's nothing there. How does that happen? How do these words flip their meaning so quickly? But the point is this. It's that we have been, I don't want to say brainwashed. Rather, we've been made suggestible to what is and isn't worth doing. And it kind of makes us stupid. We live in this world where we just go along. People just suddenly, you could go to the same people, talk to them 5-10 years ago, and they wouldn't say the same things they're saying now. Now they're just imitating what everyone else says, which includes the people who run the media, as well as the people who consume the media. They're all on the same spectrum. So, but enough of that. Van Gogh's ear, I'm glad he's here. Well, I don't know if he can talk, but he can write. He says, do you think Jacques Ellul's book on propaganda would need an updated version because of the nature of the internet? To which the answer is no. Jacques Ellul's book on propaganda and his other 3 books on technology pretty much explained what was going to happen. Yeah, there's more technology and someone else needs to write a book about the effect of the smartphone. Don't look at me to do that. Someone out there needs to think about that book. And that's a different kind of a book. That's a very specific issue book. Whereas what Jacques Ellul wrote is the foundational principles. Why does propaganda work? He also asks, and this is a much more interesting question as far as I'm concerned, what do you think are the top 5 greatest American Gothic films? I'm going to give you more than 5. Now, if you don't understand the phrase American Gothic, I did a series on this in the Anadromous Life essay site, which I just discovered I can't access here in Georgia anymore, and I hope you can access it it's on WordPress, wherever you live, because it is an important thing to read. I was dealing with this back around 2011, and I don't think anyone else had ever put all this stuff together as one thing. People had seen bits and pieces here and there. But to make it, a quick summary of my idea is that American Gothic literature, music, film, art, generally is the American dream stripped of the optimism, seeing it in decay. So, there are films that do this, that show the America in decay. They're not political films. They're not showing what happens if, the candidate you hate gets in office. It's not that kind of stuff. So often I hear people doing things, and I know, you're talking about Trump, or you're talking about Biden, or you're talking about George Floyd, or you're talking about abortion, or whatever it is. And it's just some little issue that's coming, maybe it's been here for a while, but then it's going as well. Whereas American Gothic culture sees that there used to be something here, and now it's crumbling. I suggest my series of 6 essays. Is it 6? 5 or 6? Yeah, 6 essays on the subject. And I'll put a link below to that. But yes, I do have some favorites. Now, what's interesting here is you're going to hear these and you're going to say, wait a minute, those are different kinds of films. That's because you're looking at them like, that's a Western, that's a drama, courtroom drama, that's a horror film, and you're thinking like that. And also, when I say American Gothic, I do not mean goth, nor do I mean European Gothic, which would be Frankenstein, Dracula, vampires, all of that. I'm thinking of it in a very different way, which has this vision of America, which, like I say, I've explained in much more depth. So here are my 5, I would say in no particular order, but they're kind of in a particular order. So the first one would be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not anything made since 1974, but the original one from about 1974, where chain and saw are 2 different words. And just the visuals alone in that. And the sweaty feeling. And yeah, it's a film which is still horrific. Because it's like, the whole film is like someone scraping their fingers on a blackboard. It's just, yeah. And I've tested this out with younger people who think they're so cool. And this movie makes you realize how uncool you are very quickly. And the decor of bones and feathers and fur and just the old houses and such. American Gothic all the way. Texan Gothic, absolutely. To Kill a Mockingbird, courtroom drama about race. But the whole thing it's like, well, it's a Southern Gothic. Boo Radley is completely an American Gothic creation. This guy lives alone in a house. No one ever sees him. He comes out. Everyone thinks he's a monster. If that film was in color, it wouldn't be half as effective. It's black and white. It has this dark patina to it. And scenes of kids wearing, 1930s Halloween costumes. For some reason to us, people look back at old Halloween costumes and say, ooh, that's just so creepy. I laugh and I go, no, that's called handmade. What you're used to is machine-made stuff, which has a slickness to it. But anyway, To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, just the scene in there with the rabid dog coming down the street. That's just pure American Gothic. That's America. The rabid dog is coming down this crumbling street. Taxi Driver. It's kind of apocalyptic film noir. And in my theory, I don't go into it too much in dealing with these things in my essays, but in my theory, film noir is one of the sidebars to American Gothic, because it's all dark, and it's all just this vision of the city as this place of shadows and of where fate is out to crush you and such. But Taxi Driver is film noir in the apocalyptic mode. And I think the apocalyptic mode for American culture was in the 1970s. And after that, what you hit is the apocalyptic mode kind of gets cannibalized by the commercial mode. And the commercial mode then pretends everything is great, which is why we keep going back to the 80s, because it's the last time you could pretend things were really cool. or because a lot of people were children then, but even the movies of that period hold up as children's movies, so a lot of people see these movies young. But Taxi Driver, oh my goodness, another film that just sweats. This one just sweats of New York City nights, of steam vents coming out of the sewers, and if you've been in New York City, you know what those smell like. There's the scene of the guy who's got his hair super slicked back, and he's playing. This is Gene Krupa playing the drums on the street. I've seen the guy for real. I've seen that guy. Just a nightmare. And New York City was a nightmare during that period. Later, it got slicked up, but no. Taxi Driver would be the next one. Santa Sangra. Now, this may be the one that everyone goes, huh? It's a film by Alejandro Jodorowsky. He was Chilean, but ended up doing a lot of his work in Mexico. And this film is, and there's a whole category we could say here of Latin Gothic. And again, Latin Gothic has much closer to American Gothic than it is to European Gothic, Latin American Gothic. And in this one, he's got like weird circuses and people without their arms, and the whole use of sideshow freaks is really one of the hallmarks. So the recent film by Guillermo del Toro, Nightmare Alley, which was a remake of an old film noir. Both versions of those are classic American Gothic films. But neither of them quite make this list. And a couple more here. Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, perfect American Gothic. The Victorian gingerbread house, standing in isolation, the strange figures. And yet the real horror takes place in the abandoned suburban, motel on the side of the road. And so it's this strange mixture. You see, the Gothic takes over whenever the decay sets in. And we have suburbs in this country that are just Gothic nightmares, suburban Gothics. Also, Night of the Hunter, the only movie Charles Laughton ever made, with Robert Mitchum as the preacher, with love and hate tattooed on either fist. Total American Gothic movie. And the last one, it's more, I think this is 7, but the best American Gothic Western that I have seen so far, until somebody makes Blood Meridian, is Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. And truth be told, many of Clint Eastwood's films are American Gothics, including the Sergio Leone films, including The Beguiled, High Plains Drifter, where he is essentially burning down the whole town because he is justice and vengeance incarnate. And in fact, you can look at so many of Clint Eastwood's films where he is playing judgment upon evil. He's not playing death, he's playing judgment. So he doesn't just come and kill people, but when someone has done something terrible, the gun of Clint Eastwood comes out. But Unforgiven is where he took all the themes from his earlier Westerns and put them into one distilled place. Won an Academy Award for it, for the film, best film of the year. And especially that final scene. It's all about the decay of the West. But that final scene where he comes in to get revenge, and it's dark, and it's raining, and there's one really amazing close-up here where you just see Clint Eastwood's face. He's older and more grizzled, and it's dark, and the rain is happening behind him, and you see the American flag behind him. That is American Gothic. Citizen Payne writes, I just read The Right Stuff, and sitting here in 2022, while enjoyable and informative, I found it annoyingly cynical. What is going on with this Tom Wolfe character, and how does he fit into how we got here? Well, the truth is, Tom Wolfe is tremendously important, because he wrote the book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which is his take on the failed messianic dreams of the psychedelic hippie era, particularly those coming from Ken Kesey. And in a sense, revealing that the Kesey experiment wasn't this moment where everybody went, oh my, let's get high, oh yeah. Rather, it was an American Gothic moment. It was really more about the decay of America. And in fact, there is a kind of hippie Gothic aesthetic which shows up almost immediately in something like Easy Rider. So, but Tom Wolfe was really important. He also did, what is it? I want to say The Electric Tangerine Flake Baby, something like that. But it was all about the guys doing car culture in Los Angeles. And then there was The Right Stuff. I think what makes that cynical is that what he's doing is he wrote that in the late 70s at a time when people were beginning to see through the space dreams. That is to say, the space dreams were all optimism in the 1960s. But by the Apollo 13, certainly, the bloom was off the rose, and realized we're kind of marooned here between here and the moon, and there isn't that much on the moon. And what Tom Wolfe was doing was showing how these guys were kind of heroic, but at the same time undercutting that heroism in his book. Tom Wolfe loves to pull apart things, but he's also really connected to the older culture. And as he says, his basic way of exploring things is to be the man on the moon. So he'll sit there in his white suit and be interviewing people. But he'll interview people about things that everyone supposedly knows, but they don't know. I really enjoy Tom Wolfe, but I can see where someone would consider him cynical, especially now where people like Elon Musk are kind of ginning up optimism about space again, to which my thought is, okay, you get to Mars, it's going to be just the moon Mach 2, because there isn't much you can do on Mars either. It isn't exactly a hospitable place. And you can't really get out much beyond that until you have, there's this dream that technology will save us. And the reality is, nope, it won't. So that's my thought on that. Ronito El Destructor Milagroso writes, "Hi, Mr. Byrne. What have you started, Daejun? I have a simple question. Who are the comic book superheroes and supervillains you find the most interesting in concept that you could remember?" Okay, we're just talking comic books here. I'm not going to talk about movies, although some of these characters obviously made movies. The most obvious one is Batman. I think Batman is probably the most interesting character, and I just think the story is a classic. It really is a really mythological story of the man who loses his parents to crime, is inspired by bats, but becomes a technological whiz and goes out and fights them. But there's a dark side to him always. And then there's his nemesis, the Joker. And the Joker, I've already done 2 videos on the Joker, which I will probably link somewhere in this video. But the Joker is, I think, one of the great villains of all time. And I think Heath Ledger's Joker and Joaquin Phoenix's Joker are both great. But so are the Jokers of Alan Moore and Brian Bolland and some of just those things. And the fact that he is, in a sense, the king of the dark clowns, as the name of my video suggested. I think the Joker is really fascinating. I was just thinking there was a comic book character on this kind of obscure, nobody remembers it, comic book company called First Comics, back when comic books were kind of changing a lot in the 1980s. And there was a character named Grim Jack that I really liked, and he had a very interesting, he was a Batman-ish character, but didn't dress up. He had like a beret with a feather in it, and a I think it's a red cape, but he kind of went between worlds, and I thought he was a very interesting superhero. Most superheroes, you won't hear me mention Spider-Man and Hulk and Thor, but nor am I going to go on about Flash, even Superman. They don't interest me that much because I don't think they get to the... Batman's the only one I think's got serious depth to him. The Superman Ubermensch concept disturbs me. So I think that I will say that. However, if you want real villains, there are 2 real villains. The 2 most wicked characters in fiction. One is Punch, the English version of the Pulcinella. Pulcinella from the Commedia dell'arte. But Punch is an absolute psychopath. And his wife Judy gives him the baby to watch. He ends up killing the baby. So she comes back and complains. He ends up killing her. He kills other people. Finally, he's sentenced to die. In some versions of the story, he kills the hangman. In other versions, the hangman gets him. Then he goes down and meets death and kills death. What a badass. And what a complete psychopath. And Punch is one of the funniest figures as well. And I think that people say, well, why was he so popular? Because he was and is. Well, it's because he does the things you can only think about. What mother hasn't really wanted to just silence that child? What father hasn't wanted to just stop to his wife? But Punch just does it. absolutely taboo breaking, absolute psychopathy, absolutely genius. Political correctness be damned. Secondly, and darker, is Stagger Lee. Very much like Punch. Stagger Lee is an African-American legend, and there are multiple songs about Stagger Lee. Really parallels, but I don't think they're influenced by each other, but really parallels the Punch with some rather big differences. For one thing, Stagger Lee is never funny. He seems to be the incarnation of some sort of really dark African spirit, deity, or something. Or the man who has to prove his worth. But he does so, he kills his friend Billy DeLion, he kills other people, he does so, I mean, there's some versions of the song, particularly recitations out of prison by black prisoners, where it's just like, it's like your ears are literally burning when you hear what's going on. And I think Stagger Lee, as an image, and he too goes down to the devil and fights the devil after his death. Stagger Lee, there's all these songs and stuff, absolutely brutal character. And I often think that in gangster rap, you have the Stagger Lee character come in. The difference between the Punch character and the Stagger Lee character is that the Punch character, nobody wants to be like Punch. Punch is the person you're like, oh, I can't believe he did that. But the Stagger Lee character has become something of an archetype for the African-American black man. And that is to say that he is the man who is brutal. He is the man who is, in a sense, the imitation of strong masculinity. And so I suggest looking that up. Andrew Chambers says, I've noticed you talk more about musical artists in the How We Got Here series, not so much about the visual artists. I would be interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on the state of visual arts and the rise of the art market as its own kind of monster over the last few decades. Also, are there any contemporary visual artists that you find appealing for what they are saying about our current climate? To which the answer is, that's a long question. And I'm going to get around to dealing more with the art world. And I couldn't do it any justice here. I was trying to think about, are there any artists now that are active that I consider to be meaningful in the context of this society? Now, I've seen lots of contemporary art, but it's like music now. It's like, yeah, there's art out there, but the context for it is bad. The galleries, online, scrawled on subway walls, whatever, none of it is, there's no good place to appreciate it. Why? That's the long story. And I will say, I promise you this, I will try before the end of the year to get more into art. I plan on doing more of that because I do know about art. And for one thing, I've been studying the art of Georgia, which I do find a fascinating tradition which very few people know about. Matthias Bergman says, hi, Byrne. During your time in New York City in the 1980s and 90s, you spent a lot of time with people in the musical subculture, people who had little to do, I would say nothing to do, with Christianity. But as I understood you, you were a Christian all the time, yes, so you lived in a very different reality than most in your environment. I think this is also true of many newcomers to this corner of the internet. So the question, what are good strategies for dealing with people from this other reality? And were you able to give people from the subculture, he says subculture, but I'd say subcultures, a glimpse into your reality from time to time and change their perspective? And to answer the last part first, yes, sometimes. But part of the problem is there was nowhere to take them because most of the churches didn't want to deal with these people. That is to say, if you've got someone who's doing painting themselves blue, turning themselves upside down, and cracking eggs full of paint over the V in their crotch with an extremely ironic take on everything. How do you deal with that in a church? I did find that I didn't walk around with a sign going, I'm the local Christian, but I did find people would turn to me at moments because they recognized something. And one of the things they recognized, as more than one friend said, you're like the only really sane person among us. Or someone else says, you're the only person no one talks about behind their backs, which I took as very high praise and was very sad about, because why was that true? I would talk with people, but one of the problems people have who are Christians, this was certainly true then, maybe a little less true among the people who might be watching this video, is that we live in a culture that's been rapidly changing. And how do you deal with people in that mindset? For instance, what mindset are they in? There's more than one subculture. Some people have been damaged as a result of their beliefs or lack of them. Those people are actually perhaps more open to a real discussion. But people who have been encased in this bubble of ideology, of cute things, of different genres of media to consume, they're very hard to talk to because they already have their religion. One of the things I realized, though, is that people who have a real Christian sense have to do the really hard work that someone who is like a missionary would. A missionary wouldn't just go to New Guinea and live with a tribe and just stop talking about Jesus. For one thing, they don't even understand your language, which is what you're going to find. For a second thing, once you do get to know their language, now you need to know why they're doing what they do, which means you have to spend time with their mythology. And in some cases, in the present world, that is really hard. And in fact, many people who get interested in, I'm reading a book right now by a Baptist minister, who's talking about the horror culture. And at first I was kind of like, yeah, this guy seems to be on it. And then after a while I'm realizing he just got done talking about the furries as if they were like champions of freedom. He's talking about people who are like involved with vampirism and blood sucking and stuff, as if it's just like, yeah, they're just trying to find themselves. And I'm sitting there going, you need to have a bit of a critique and you need to have a distance. If you don't have a distance, you can't do anything. But you need to be involved. So how do you get that distance? And at the same time, well, I always made a difference I drew a line between observation and participation. Participation is when my friends in rock band said, hey, Byrne, why don't you put on a dress and come on stage for our show? To which I go like, no. And people would ask me, are you going to get a tattoo, Byrne? Because a tattoo is a symbol that you cross a boundary. I go, nope. Are you going to do X? No. And I would say no in such a way as that, why would I do such a thing? It's like coming up to me and saying, Byrne, are you going to take drugs? No. And if your next question out of your mouth is, why not? Well, now you know why. It's because you would consider that so normal that not doing it somehow strikes you as normal. So, or rather abnormal. So how do you talk with these people? Well, in the missionary situation, you listen to the mythology. Eventually you'll find something in the mythology you can connect to. But most people I know who are Christians are in such protection mode, and they stay in protection mode all their lives, that all they want to do is make sure their children don't go astray, while many of them are simply pushing them into the path of the oncoming train. So that's one thing I can tell you. There is one big difference between dealing with the people of the present and dealing with the people in, say, the pagan pre-Christian world. The people in the pagan pre-Christian world are treating life seriously. The people who have been born and bred, we'll say, after the 60s, and have given their children into the hands of the technological vacuum that's been created and filled with the online culture, don't realize that we've been going down into a mire of stupidity and down into a mire of the propagandized mind, neither of which can be argued with. You don't go up to someone and argue them out of their position. You have to show them something real. I'm going to leave that discussion here because it's just way too big, but we'll call that an introduction that I'll probably deal more with later. Jeffro Blue Guitar Man writes, as a Christian, how do we fight anti-Christian propaganda, such as Facebook, Twitter, etc., who control the flow of information? It seems anti-Christian propaganda machine has a valuable tool in these platforms. To which I would say, the only way to fight the propaganda is not to make any, which Christians have been utterly, utterly terrible at doing. And Jacques Ellul says the worst thing about Christianity in the present, and he wrote this back in the 60s, which is why his book does not need to be upgraded, because he saw exactly what was going to happen to the church. He says the church has been faced with two choices. Either one, not to make propaganda and just go about the business of being a church, in which case you lose touch with all those people who are affected by propaganda, or two, make Christian propaganda and turn your faith into the hoax version of itself. And that's what so many Christians have done, which has only made the anti-Christian propaganda go, see, I told you, look how stupid this is. My answer is, you cannot do anything political on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, you can, but basically on Facebook, what a mess, because when they started doing Facebook, everybody just joined up. No one was thinking about this whole division thing coming down the road. They just thought, okay, my relatives are on here now, and my university chums, and the person I met while traveling through Ethiopia, they're all here. But what happens when you make a comment on someone's video, they've assumed some political position, you make a comment questioning it, and then you get deleted from their friends list. I've had that happen to me. I remember the first time was about 2010. And at that point I said, this is not a good forum at all for any kind of political propaganda, political sharing, etc. I consider people who share any kind of political message on Facebook to essentially be children. Because you're just preaching either to the choir, or you're just making sure you can't communicate with anyone else. Because in truth, in reality, you don't walk in with all your political positions on your sleeve saying, do you agree with these? No, you don't. You don't enter a real conversation like that. So why would you do it in such a place like Facebook? Facebook, though, has all these other problems. I'm not going to go into them. But Twitter seems to be designed for political stuff. And I've joined on Twitter recently, and I've added things, and I'm sitting there going why am I here? Well, I know why I joined. I wanted to get in touch with a few people. I'm going to stay there for a little while longer, and I'm going to jump off, because it seems like everyone's trying to make political points, and there doesn't seem to be any point. So it becomes, propaganda, propaganda, propaganda. The point is not to make propaganda. The point is to use your mind. The point is not to make rash statements. The point is not to think your side of any argument knows everything. The point is to have some humility and say, try to talk in the real world to people. Okay, one of the last two questions here, 2 or 3 questions. Okay, Dmitry Terskov writes. Dimitri's always got these very long-winded questions. I've chopped it down a little, but what he's done essentially, Dmitry, you do this, is he sets up this one whole thing only to ask another question. So in effect, he's answered 2 questions, but I'm only going to do one. When did you first encounter ideas about evolutionary biology and their relationship to ideas? Was it Dawkins' book? I assume he's talking The Selfish Gene. Or was it a secondary source? I find the idea of evolution is a lot like the idea of death. Virtually all people understand that it is true and inevitable, yet prefer not to talk about it, as both have a kind of demeaning anti-agent quality. Okay. A lot of people in my generation, I'm assuming he's younger than me, are getting seriously shaped by this simple idea, which I think makes them somewhat savvy, not unlike generations in the past who thought about death a lot. I wonder where this is going to lead us. So I'm going to do this part of the question. And I've been thinking about evolution more lately. And I've been thinking, Dawkins' idea essentially is what's happening is these genes are running through all of the history of life, the biological world. They are fighting for survival within us. They create us to pass themselves on. To which I'm sitting there going I'm sorry, no. that can't be what life is like. Because it's not, people will often say it's about survival. I'm going then why do you get drunk, and why do you smoke, and why do you take drugs, and why do you break up with people who would do you well if you learn to forgive them? Why do you do all of these things, which are all death-oriented things? And here's what I'm thinking now. I'm going back to Michael Polanyi, the chemist who wrote Personal Knowledge, and I would highly recommend, Dmitry, if you want to deal with this stuff, go to Michael Polanyi's 1950s book, Personal Knowledge. Because what he does there is undermine most of what we consider in a popular way, because this isn't the way all scientists look at it, but there's a popular conception that the scientists are on to the empirical data. And then the religious people and all those other people are somehow just superstitious fools. And Dawkins basically says as much. Where what Polanyi says is there is a big problem with evolutionary theory in that it is impossible for the lesser thing to explain the more complex thing. So in other words, the fact that I am largely made out of water does not tell you about the words I'm speaking at all. You can sit there and learn everything about hydrogen and oxygen and them being the oxygen being squared and everything like that. You can learn what makes water freeze and all of this. And the only time water, as part of my interior bodily makeup, makes any difference to me is when I don't have enough, when it's too cold, when it's tainted and polluted, when it's poisoned. That's when water matters. It's when it's wrong. Same with DNA. DNA does not explain my words at all. It does not explain my ability to look at things. It doesn't explain art. It doesn't explain literature. It doesn't explain anything. It just tells you that there are certain propensities within you. Likewise, and this is one of the places I disagree with Peterson on. Peterson's always going back and saying, well, chimpanzees do this. They're violent. And I'm going yeah. And therefore, I'm going okay, I do believe there's some kind of evolution going on, but I put no qualitative meaning to that. That is to say, it's things change. So, because it's not an uphill. We're not going to a point where we're all going to suddenly evolve into the best possible thing I don't think that's possible. But we will change, and we will make certain improvements, and at the same time, we'll make more defects, especially with technology. So, Peterson is always relating us back to animal behavior. And my thought is exactly the same as my issues with water or DNA or chemistry, the chemistry inside of me, molecular structure, atomic structure, whatever. These are conditional boundaries. Boundary conditions is what he calls them. And they limit, they're boundary limitations. They limit what I can do. But they don't tell me, for instance, that I don't have to be aggressive. They don't tell me the fact that I don't have to follow my sexual urges. They don't tell me that I can choose to make art rather than to go through the endless insanity. And in fact, one thing I'm noticing more and more is that people today act more like animals than people did 100 years ago. What do I mean? Is that people 100 years ago still had a sense, there were things like decorum, a way of living, that there was civilization. Whereas people today just think that they themselves are the only thing. They're like, and that they need to follow their instincts. I remember going to L'Abri in 1993, and I met a couple of guys. I played for them Henry Rollins doing a poetic piece, I don't know if poetry is the right word, rant we'll call it, called The Mechanic, which was really how you would live if you lived simply that you were just a biomechanism. And basically it's that the man always wants to get it in with the woman, literally inside the woman, and that's all there was to it. And that's basically the gist of that rant. And these guys are going like, well, yeah, right. And they were both supposedly Christians. I think both of them later, well, no, one of them I know for sure faded that scene. But the other one, too, Calvin College student, also was just like, well, and here's the point. That, what they've learned that they're just, there was that song, "We're Just Mammals, Baby," or something like that. They've learned that. They've learned that. Because people used to not think that way. They realized that if we were brought down to the level of beasts, we would act like that. In fact, people more and more are talking about us as a species. And I'm sitting there going like, you don't get it, do you? Yeah, of course I'm a primate. But the difference between me and the great apes is pretty much the difference between me and a beetle. That is to say, they're still way on the other side. There is miles and miles, hundreds, a Grand Canyon between those two things. And there's a reason why we don't simply say we're animals. More like, so if their urges tell them, I just want to meet a girl. And the fact is we pulled out all the gates in culture that say that's wrong or that's a problem. Therefore, they won't do it. But in the day when people used those cultural gates to keep themselves from simply being an animal, they were less like animals. So more and more, I am seeing that we've got something radically mixed up with evolutionary models. That is to say, you have to start from the top, not from the bottom. The more we go into things, the less we know. Especially if you assume that this is the reality, the subatomic particles, the cellular structures. If you think that those things are the reality, you're sorely mistaken. Because here's the point, we wouldn't know about any of those things if it wasn't for something else, our brains, and how we as human beings get along in this world. And so I think there's something about the evolutionary model that has to change, because I think you have to start at the top and go down, not start at the bottom and go up, looking for an explanation. You have to start with what you know, and here's what we know. People 500 years ago were every bit as intelligent as we are. People 2,000 years ago were every bit as intelligent as we are. The first records of humans are all religious. Now, there's a lot I'd like to discuss at this point, but I'm not going to because it's just too big. Dmitri goes on and raises a question about whether Protestantism is just like an evolutionary manifestation which is filling a niche. To which I would say, if you heard what I just said, you realize, no, it doesn't work that way at all. And that's what happens when you start applying this kind of bizarre bottom-up evolutionary model to everything. And I'll just leave it there. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a philosopher, this is just how I see it. And I can't see it any other way. Okay, Dejin says, what are your thoughts on people who seem to replace having children over having a pet, such as dogs, cats, etc.? I'm not against having a pet, but not only do I hear insane stories about what people do for their pets, the pets they own, or become the animal they desire, I personally see and hear stories about people I know calling their pets my son and daughter, using them as children. Do I need to even say anything? It's one more manifestation, and a serious one, of the problem of identity. Once you behead the universe, there is no God, there's only the sacred self, it's only what I want, it's me, it's about me, and no, why should I have children? There was a porn star who said, how could a baby come through that little hole? No way. The hole is just there for pleasure. It's just a thing. So the baby is not coming through a lot of holes. But people are feeling empty and they want something to fill the void. And pets being, well, at least dogs are unconditional. But, cat people will argue that cats are unconditional lovers. Everyone knows that's not true. You got to have the stuff there for them that'll wander off. And dogs and cats, particularly cats, will eat you if you die in the room. It's like, they're not really your friends. I think there's a lot more mystery to dogs and cats. Anyone who has this weird sort of romantic attraction to dogs and cats, this kind of like, oh, dogs, cats, they don't understand them at all. They really don't. Because, there's a great scene in the movie, Kieslowski's Three Colors Red, where this dog gets hit by a car, and they found this great little, kind of a whippet or something, and he's just like laying on the back, looking at the person. It's just the dog's eyes. He really captures the mystery of what a dog is. What is this creature that follows alongside of us? It's a very mysterious thing. Interestingly enough, in Georgia, Westerners come here and are appalled by the dogs on the streets. Georgians just feed them and pet them. Which is the better view? So yeah, I think it's a sign, and maybe sometime I'll do more of a thing on pets, but it's a sign, not before I do the thing on cuteness, Dejin. He really wants me to do that. I really need to. But I gotta get this 2020 thing out of my system. Finally, Palama writes, any recommendation on promoting cultural interest or just building a community in a small town environment? Really interesting question. And I'm going to deal more with this in future episodes of my channel, because I'm going to deal more with, okay, what are answers to our questions? How do we make art again? How do we make music again? And I don't mean, rock stars singing on the stage. I mean us making music with each other. And this is a big question. One of the things I noticed, and I said this in my Labrie, the importance of Labrie for the 20th century episode, is had Labrie not been in Switzerland, the whole mountainside would have been honeycombed with people who'd stayed in the area. They wouldn't all be part of the same religious sphere, although many of them would be Christians, but many of them would also be honest seekers. And at that time, it's changed since then, but at that time, the population in this particular alpine valley was not that great. And I think had people since the 1950s and 60s and 70s kind of just stayed behind whenever the mood took them one by one, that would be a very fascinating thing. And that is my thought. Again, I'm really not in favor of artificial communities. And when I say artificial communities, I mean more the people who choose to be on a commune. And I don't mean the Hutterites and Amish and people like that, because those are genuine communities. They subdivide and they start new versions, but that's a very different kind of a thing. What I do mean, though, is that, yes, so a group of people says, we need to start a community. You're already in trouble because you don't know what you're talking about. Most of the people who are going to say that have no clue about what they're talking about. Where I think it would be better is if there was a place, say in a small town, where people just decided to come there. And people would just come, not, and here's the important thing, not to all be part of the same religious community. Why do I say that's so important? Because then you start getting into a cultish mentality. I'd want to see a small town that had an Orthodox church and had a Grim Griswold in it and had a Dutch Calvinist church and such like that. I'd want to see a small town that had people coming who didn't go to church. In other words, it's not about everyone coming and being part of the same community. It's about implanting people who want this. It's the idea, like I said, over time in Switzerland, that place would be honeycombed with very interesting people. Unfortunately, that could not happen. And I've talked to people at L'Abri who said, yeah, that probably shouldn't have happened. But I disagree. I think it should have happened because one of the things that prevents anything that people are doing from multiplying into something really interesting that has an effect is the fact that everyone's alone doing it. There used to be art movements, surrealism, impressionists, symbolist movement, all these different things. Now, apart from the actual content in the real sense of what they were thinking and doing, they made manifestos. They were they aligned themselves together. What made the Inklings in Oxford so influential was because they had a loose confederation, largely circling around C.S. Lewis, of people who would get together, particularly at the Bird and the Baby, they used to call it. Was it the Eagle and the Child pub. And they would just get together. They would read things to each other. They would meet together, and there was not an officially signed document. And I think there's a big difference between a church and a community. What we need are communities. What we also need are people who are willing to commit to each other. I have much more to say about that, but I'll save that for some video. Niels Galen writes, I'd be interested in any views you might have that have a European hook. I know you stayed places here, and now you're somewhat closer permanently. He says, I do regard Georgia as part of Eurasia. Well, it is. And has anything grabbed your attention, trends you've noticed perhaps? How do you look at Europe? Have your views changed? What's to learn here, or what disappoints, or what is left to save? Thanks. Looking forward always. Plenty left to save. One of the things that makes Europe in some ways more interesting than in America is that in America, you can have a complete deconstruction of everything. Because America itself is completely plowing in its past, or turning it into a tourist attraction and building anew, always. That has been America's history. And that's a dangerous, dangerous thing, because you ruin the effect of the past. And many, many beautiful places in America have been ruined by new roads, new suburbs, bad buildings. That isn't to say there aren't bad buildings here. I'm looking at one out my window right now. There are bad buildings. What do we do? Well, without getting into that, which is more on the, do you have any answers, Byrne? I will say this. I really like Europe. For instance, I go to the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic is one of my favorite places. It's also one of the most atheistic places on earth. And when I go there, at first I'm always kind of like, it's difficult to connect with people. Then after a while, now I've been going there since the year 2000 to the Czech Republic. And after a while, it took me a long time to make friends. But now when I go there, I actually visit people I know. And I consider that a wonderful thing. So it's taken time. And whenever I arrive in the Czech Republic, at first I'm all alone, wandering around, looking at things. But eventually, by the time I'm ready to leave, it's usually a 2-week trip. Last time it was 3. And people say, well, Byrne, why are you staying in places so long? To which I go like, do you think that's long? If you do, check your Americanism at the door. Because that's like an American thing. Because you get no holidays, no vacation time at all. And you tend to waste it on fast, in and out kind of travel. You know, you don't want to spend too long in anywhere. Rookmucker makes that point very clearly. But I think more and more that you see that with people drifting around, digital nomads. There's some problem with digital nomads that they're not connecting with the reality. And whenever the reality gets thick, they leave. But now, you know, if someone said, you have to live in the Czech Republic, Byrne, there's hardly any Christians there, I'd be like, that'd be great. Because I find them serious in discussion about things, even though they have a really dark sense of humor. And it's the same with the French. I find I can talk to them. Where in America, as we always say, religion and politics, and what's the other one? Sports? Whatever. There's the 3 things you can't talk about. Well, Americans, there's a lot more you can't talk about. Don't start talking about death. That'll get you in trouble. Don't ask about someone's family life. That'll get you in trouble. Don't mention money. That's probably the 3rd thing. That'll get you in trouble. And I find that to be so limiting. Why not talk about religion? Why not talk about politics? Not argue. Well, argue is okay, but not demonize. That's bad. So I think I'll talk more about why Europe in the future, Niels. So keep bothering me about that. Finally, the last thing is Smoking Alien 3 says, I have recently watched a few Tarkovsky's films, and I think he got that from spending time on this channel. Glad to know. He says he watched Stalker, Sacrifice, and Nostalgia. I think they are obviously parabolic films. I know you're a fan. I believe God is actually working in these films through Tarkovsky. I wonder if you came across any writings of his where he got that sense. Just one example in Sacrifice, where it starts with a single tree. Alexander sets up with his young son. The son can't speak because the doctor did surgery on his throat. Then when they get to a thick patch of the trees, the doctor comes with the wife and speaks to them. When the doctor leaves, Alexander, he begins to lament about the world and humankind and loses the son. When the son surprises him, Alexander is startled and hurts the son. At the end, after Alexander has saved the world, you have to see the movie, that's Sacrifice, he says, we see the boy, and he says, in the beginning was the Word. Why was that, Papa? And it seems the single tree is Jesus, the Word speaking through the Word speaking the single truth. The light is represented by the boy. But over the course of time, mankind distorted the truth by many of their own teachings, and this didn't let the word speak. He says, I think nostalgia has a similar meaning as sacrifice, and the candlelight is the word of God, the light. Yeah. And he wrote some more. It was a long thing, but this is what I took as the most important stuff. And in fact, the thing you have to remember is the Son doesn't speak until he says, in the beginning of the Word. Why is that, Father? That's the last lines of the movie. And then there's a tree that's very much like a crucifix, a very gnarled tree. But here's the interesting thing. The tree, when they planted it, was dead. And there's like a leaf growing on it at the end. And the boy is watering it because he was told the story of a monk who watered his staff until the staff started to grow. Yeah, Tarkovsky is very important and very spiritual. Where did he get this sense? That's a good question. Undoubtedly, he got it from his Orthodox faith. He wasn't, shall we say, the most small O orthodox in his orthodoxy, big O orthodoxy. Nevertheless, it was very important to him. And I would also say it was done during a time, he kind of came of age during a time, during the Khrushchev thaw. And so there was a bit more freedom in the late 50s, early 60s. And people had those kind of conversations. And some of the people he knew artistically, like Sergei Parajanov, who's also an amazing filmmaker and also an Orthodox Christian, a very odd character indeed. Nevertheless, and they were very good friends. This was the kind of thing I think they were talking about. Because neither of them were interested in making political statements. Also, political statements would just get you thrown away. So I think what they did was they made their films in such a way as that they let the spiritual elements come through. And I would highly recommend 2 books by Tarkovsky. The first is Sculpting in Time. Sculpting in Time by Andrei Tarkovsky. If you want to learn more about his way, a very Christian way of making films, when this video is over, look for that book and buy it. Secondly, I think it's a bit more expensive these days, is his diaries, although you can probably find a paperback version. And I wouldn't recommend the diary immediately. You need Sculpting in Time first to help you understand the way he's looking at things. But his diaries are very important. So we're going to leave that there. I have been working to create bookshelves for my room here. And right now you're just seeing fabric that I put on the wall. Because I aesthetically hate, white, beige-ish walls. And so I am colonizing it to look like something. I want it when people walk into the room, already just by putting this fabric up here, people walk in and go, gosh, this feels homey. Why? Because it doesn't feel like anything obvious. It sets the grounds for dialogue. And that is the point. That is the point, is to set up a world where other people and discussions with other people matter more than ourselves. You can't hide away. And I am really happy with all the questions here. Very thoughtful stuff. I wish I could have given more of them better answers, and in the future I will deal with some of these things in more depth. Meanwhile, do remember that the anadromist is someone going against the stream, like the anadromous salmon. And I encourage you to do that, and one of the best ways you can do that is by cutting off some of the notifications you get all the time on your smartphone. Because too often people are, it's like I'm in a room, someone looks down, oh, there's this news story. I remember the first time that happened. Someone was in my house in Alaska, and they stopped and go, oh, David Bowie just died. Yeah, I could have waited the day to hear that. You know, if you're in someone's presence, put the phone down. Turn it off. You don't, unless someone's dying, you don't have to answer it. You know, if you're expecting a relative who's on the edge of death, a good friend on the edge of death, to get a notification about this, by all means, leave it on. You know, someone's got surgery, leave it on. But for almost everything else, turn it off. Because what is more important about any of the people getting in touch with you than the people in your presence immediately? Reality. That's the thing. Well, I'll see you soon. And as the Georgians say, droabit, which means I'll see you later, but what it literally means is temporarily, just for a while. We'll meet each other again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.